Welcome to our third in a series of September PSG Consulting First Monday webinars. Today we have breaking news of sorts. PSG Consulting with TargetSmart conducted dial groups of the debate between Vice President Harris and Donald Trump among important segments of the electorate, including persuasion targets and those who need mobilizing. This is our first in-depth presentation of the findings. So this is how it worked. We recruited approximately 100 voters to participate, asking them to take a survey before the debate and then again afterwards. As the debate was going on, voters dialed up or down on a moment-to-moment basis, depending if they had a negative or positive reaction to what was being said. What makes this dial group so unique is the use of hot buttons in addition to the dials. Key moments in the debate could be so significant that voters would choose one or two hot buttons to record a more emotional response. Vice President Harris won the debate, as has been widely covered. But this research evidenced so much more in terms of other dynamics that were present. Her numbers moved in her favor as more people learned about who she is as a person and as a presidential candidate. Trump is a known quantity, and his numbers hardly budged, but he clearly did some harm to himself. To understand the significance of her performance and its impact requires us to appreciate the qualities voters desire from their leaders and how that is implicitly impacted by gender and race. The participants we recruited for the dials, single women, people of color, young people, have an enormous impact on the outcomes of races. But we also recruited different types of categories, such as double negative voters. But as we have touched upon in the past, we ask ourselves, are there other prisms through which we need to understand American voters? With that, let me turn it over to Erica to help frame and lead the discussion. Erica.
Thank you so much, Paige, and thank you all for being here. My name is Erica Williams-Simon. I'm a founder and principal of Story Strategy Group, and I've been working alongside Paige and a number of other brilliant advisors on a project called Innovating for the Public Good, which is really all about nurturing and developing and advancing innovations that can actually help bring us closer to, first of all, protect and preserve, but also bring us closer to a thriving democracy. And so, as Paige said, this is the third of 4 conversations that we've been having this month. And what do they have to do with innovation? Well, it's impossible to come up with innovative solutions for the problems that we face without truly understanding what we would talk about in innovation land as customer discovery, right? Who are we serving? Who are the voters? Who is the electorate? What moves them? What motivates them? How are they responding to messaging and stories and all of these moments that we're having right now? And so obviously this research is going to be so critical to understanding, what is happening in this moment, which is, again, impactful for what happens in the future. And so I'm really excited about today's conversation and about the research that you're going to hear about today. You're going to first hear from Ben Lazarus. He's TargetSmart's principal pollster and director of research, and Ben has served as a senior campaign advisor and pollster to a litany of Democratic causes and campaigns around the country. After Ben, we're going to take a couple of questions, and then we're going to turn it on over to Gretchen Barton. She's the founder of Worthy Strategy Group and a former research director at Future Majority. She's a strategist who has designed and led research initiatives in the political and policy space across America and across issues. After another question for her, then we're going to toss to Henry Fernandez, last but certainly not least. He's the CEO of the polling and research firm African American Research Collaborative, also known as AARC, which brings together pollsters, scholars, researchers, and commentators who are committed to encouraging an accurate understanding of the civic engagement of people of color and all Americans. So we're going to have a lively conversation today. If you have questions while listening to them, you can submit them using the Q&A function, and we'll have someone from our team curating questions that I can toss back to them on your behalf. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Ben.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Ben Lazarus. I am a pollster at TargetSmart, and I'm so excited. Thank you, Paige, so much for having me here and for facilitating this incredibly important research. Paige gave you a really good overview of what we did with this study. So I'm just going to kind of launch into it here, give you just a quick couple notes on the methodology. I'm going to talk you through some of the key numbers that we learned in the study in the pre-dial and post-dial survey, and then we're going to watch some video clips together of the actual debate so you can see exactly what we saw in terms of where folks were responding, how they were responding, and what that all means for Vice President Harris moving forward as we engage in these last critical weeks of the campaign season. So let's go to the next slide. Quickly walk you through what we did with this study. Think of this as a kind of combined qualitative-quantitative study. We impaneled about 100 folks across the key 7 battleground states, both swing voters and mobilization voters, to try and understand where they start before they watch the debate, what happened during the debate that provoked positive and negative responses from each candidate, and then where they finished on key metrics after they watched the debate. As Paige said, we'll talk about this really cool hot button methodology that we were able to employ. And then one thing that set this study apart from perhaps other dial studies that you may have seen out there in the wild and in media reporting is that every respondent watched the entire debate and dialed the entire debate. So the responses that we're seeing pre and post debate are based on the fully baked impressions of the entirety of the debate. So let's move to the next slide. I'll walk you through some of the numbers here. Key thing to recognize here is that the expectations were quite low for Trump going into the debate, and those low expectations were met. Right, 7 in 10 of the folks who watched, who participated in this dial study, said that Trump performed about as they expected. But a similar number, 70%, said that Kamala Harris performed above their expectations. So she had a lot to gain. He didn't have nearly as much to gain, and he really kind of met the moment for himself. Go to the next slide for me, please. This unpacks a little bit of the kind of key dimensions that folks came away from the debate about both Vice President Harris and Donald Trump. So I'll start at the bottom, which is that no one really saw VP Harris's performance as rude or overly aggressive, but most saw Trump's in that light. Where they did see Kamala Harris was as being confident, as being well-informed, as being respectful, as being strong. And I want to hold on that strength moment for just a second, because that really takes away what Trump's operating thesis is, which is all about strength. And she outperformed him on that dimension in a number of places in our research. Here in particular, just the notion of being strong, 49% said it described her, just 25% said it described him. And almost 3 in 10 said that that their mind was changed by Kamala based on this debate. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we started with showing Harris's favorability rating at plus 15, 50 to 35 before the debate, and that jumped up by double-digit margin from 50 to 64% favorable. Her unfaves dropped by 10 across this audience, from 35 to 25. Trump's numbers improved a little bit on the margin, but not nearly as much as VP Harris's did. And how did that happen? How did that materialize? Let's go to the next couple slides. We'll kind of show you specifically what dimensions moved for Vice President Harris. This notion of being a strong leader, right? They started tied on this dimension. She finished up almost 20 points. With swing voters, she started down 9, finished up double digits, 46 to 35, on being considered more of a strong leader than Donald Trump. Go to the next slide, please. Being committed to freedom, obviously part and parcel to Vice President Harris's message, this notion of freedom, right? We all know the Beyonce anthem as being central to all the imagery happening with this campaign. That really broke through, particularly with swing voters, but also mobilization voters. A 17-point jump among swing voters, a nearly 20-point jump among mobilization voters on associating being committed to freedom with her as opposed to Donald Trump. Let's go to the next slide, please. I think one of the things missing in the public narrative about this debate was just how well Harris did on the economy. Yeah. And we saw in this data like 6 or 7, this is the only slide I'm showing here because of time, but 6 or 7 different dimensions around things related to the economy that really popped for her. So she starts down with this is a slightly Democratic-leaning audience. She starts down 11 on the economy. She finishes even, 44 to 41. With swing voters in particular, the movement was acute. She moved from just 18% trust on the economy to 38% trust, basically tied with Trump by the end of the debate. If we go to the next slide, she talks a lot about an opportunity economy, right? And that really broke through in the debate as well. She moved from 54% trust with swing voters to 77% trust with swing voters on this notion of ensuring all Americans have opportunities to succeed. Let's go to the next slide. So here we're going to start to watch some of these videos. We're going to start with "They're Eating the Dogs," obviously the infamous clip, Trump's probably worst moment of the entire debate. But just to give you a sense of what we have here, the yellow lines are the moment-to-moment sentiments. Folks dialed up if they agreed strongly. They dialed down if they disagreed strongly. The yellow line is swing voters. The blue line is mobilization voters. And then if you see the kind of area under the curve, the shaded segment, that's the hot buttons. So whenever you see that shading, that in yellow, that's swing voters either saying that's inappropriate or that's a great moment, or you see the blue shading, that's mobilization voters saying that's a great moment or that's inappropriate. So let's watch this first one.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
All right, so you see a lot of shading, a huge amount of hot button moments here. Everybody's dialing down both swing and mobilization. This was really one of Trump's low points in the whole debate. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to show you a little bit of a longer clip here. This is the longest clip that we have. This is Vice President Harris's side of the abortion exchange. And I kind of want to start by just looking where the lines are now, because what you're showing here on screen is Trump's answer on abortion, which was particularly a turnoff to mobilization voters when he's talking about abortion after birth, right? The clear lie. A couple other things I want you to watch for as you watch this clip. One is when Lindsey Davis fact checks Trump, folks dialing up. The notion of the Supreme Court, that really evoked some real responses. Just the consistent uptick the entire time that she's talking. It goes up and up and up. It starts super low, and then it starts to go up and up and up and up. The notion of abortion bans without exceptions for rape or incest, and then the closing line, which I think we're all familiar with. You'll see huge amounts of hot button reactions. So let's go ahead and watch this one.
In this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what...
So yeah, just a huge amount of those hot buttons coming up right there at the end when she drops that line about the government, and particularly not Donald Trump. She speaks with such passion, right? She speaks with so much intensity, and it's clearly authentic, right? And very true to her. So this was, I think widely regarded as one of her top moments, and we certainly saw that quantify in our research here. Let's go to the next one. So this is where Trump is calling her a Marxist. You'll see folks dialing down, but I want everyone to pay attention to the split screen, because the way she uses her facial expressions, incredulity, right? Eyes raised. Yeah. I think this was a big part of why folks came away from this debate feeling like she was a strong leader, right? Is how she handled him with aplomb, with humor, and I think this is a great example of a clip. So let's go ahead and play it.
I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy, but if she ever got elected, she'd change it, and it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that...
So we saw a lot of that's inappropriate hot button usage there when he said that she's a Marxist, her father's a Marxist. But she uses this thing, right, where she says, right? And just all the nonverbal. She was so stellar in the split screen this entire debate, and this is just one example of that. Let's go to the next one, please. All right, so this is a really short clip where she reminds Trump that she's not Joe Biden. I think this is a really great example of a quick line that really resonates with folks, that speaks to an easy parry moving forward. So let's watch this one together.
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up.
All right, so that's a really short clip, right? But I mean, she was so casual in how she delivered that line. It was so matter of fact. And look how we saw spikes in both the dials and in the great moments, right? As folks internalize that. All right, we got one more clip, and we'll get to conclusions. All right, this is Trump on healthcare. I want everyone to notice specifically the mobilization dial on this one. And I think as pollsters, Henry and I have seen how motivational healthcare has been for Democrats in the era of Trump. And this is just bringing all of those memories back, right?
So which color do you want
So
them to
blue,
watch?
let's watch blue as we get through this clip.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that. And you'll be hearing about it in the not too distant future.
Again, her nonverbal reactions, right? It's quizzical, it's the eyebrows, it's the questioning look. It's diminutive of him without saying anything, right? Incredibly strong. All right, so finally, we're going to get to just a few of the conclusions here. Let's go to the next slide. So obviously, she won the debate, right? She came in with a game plan. She stuck to it. She parried the attacks. She changed the subject when she wanted to. She drove her narrative on her terms. And in doing so, she engendered a huge amount of trust and confidence and projected strength, which took away what Trump's whole operating thesis is, which is I'm strong, 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 strong. If you watch the Republican convention, it was just all a big, strongman convention. Right. She leveraged key moments, particularly on abortion. She made big gains on the economy, which people aren't talking about as much. As people get filled in on her economic plans, they're all about them, this opportunity. She parried attacks on immigration, again, answering the question she wanted to answer, and on being too close to Joe Biden. She came in with a clear strategy to own the center, and that worked really well with swing voters while not alienating the mobilization voters that we know we need to turn out. So really stay the course on that strategy. And then just overall, Trump had a low bar to clear, he didn't clear it, right? He generally met the expectations that folks had for him. So finally, last little bit here, just thinking forward, moving forward, how to build on this success, strength, confidence, preparation. These are key components of what people liked about Kamala Harris as they were just getting to know her in this debate, that she cares about people, that she stands for the middle class, that she stands for regular people, and that she obviously is the only candidate who's going to protect our freedom, using abortion rights in particular and centering abortion rights, coming back to it over and over again. The paid advertising that's up in the swing states right now, what she's talking about on the stump, very much reinforces that. Right. She knows that, and we all know we have to make this election about Roe, about Dobbs, and about abortion. And then finally, just confidently assert, she is not Joe Biden. In fact, she represents a new generation of leadership, and that really resonates with the key voters that we have to win. So I think with that, I'll cede back my time, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, Paige.
No problem.
Thank you for that. That was so interesting, although it was so triggering to watch those clips again. Yeah. So what can we learn? I mean, so you gave some key recommendations at the end, but I guess one question is, what does this tell us about the electorate? What does this tell us about where voters are right now with regards to issues, but also I got questions about gender and race, right? Like about how Kamala, Vice President Harris, came across to the voters that you were measuring.
Yeah, that's a great question, Erica. So I think first of all, she was shot out of a cannon, right, in this election. And the impressions of her were so unformed coming into this election. And this was a captive audience for her to really fill in some gaps. And I think she did a really great job of doing that as it relates to, and kind of just allaying the fears that people might have baked in based on racism and misogyny that all female candidates of color are going to face, that she was able to step past that by simply filling in the gaps and telling people about her plan and performing, being well prepared and standing up to a bully. So I think she did, just through performance, she made really big strides on that. I think, she does a great job at when the conversation turns to divisive issues, she calls it out. She calls out the divisiveness for what it is. She did that in the debate. We have another clip in our big repository of debate clips where she specifically calls out Trump's racism and talks about the Central Park Five and how he's dividing Americans along lines of race and how we want to move forward. We want to move past that. And so her line about we're not going back, it encapsulates all of that in such a clean package. And so I think just echoing what she's talking about, following her, she's a very strong leader, and she's got great instincts, and her campaign is clicking on all gears right now. And so I think the dials and the research that we just did just reinforces all of that.
That's great. And Paige, I know you've been also deep in this research. I want to bring you into just to ask a question that I mean, certainly it comes up every 4 years, but how important are these debates to swing voters based on what you saw and based on kind of what we saw with these LG? How impactful do you think this actually is?
This was an incredibly important debate, and it had a big impact because she was shot out of a cannon.
Yeah, brand new.
Brand new. People don't know her and didn't know her, and they wanted to understand who she was as a person, and they wanted to be reassured that she was up to the task of being the President of the United States. I think one of the dynamics here, which was so important, is this notion of reassurance. She reassured voters that she was up to the task, and that was such an incredible hurdle to meet.
And I think part of what I'm hearing you all say is this was really a test of her leadership, or certainly at least people's trust in her ability to lead, which I think is a really great segue to some of the worthy research. So I'm going to pass it on over now to Gretchen to talk to us a little bit about the leadership qualities and what you all found.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you today. And as Erica and Paige mentioned, some of the work that we've been doing is with the American Leadership Project. It's a project of Worthy Strategy Group to really expand the stories that we tell about women as leaders. And a couple of years ago, we were looking into what Americans were looking for in their ideal president. And in that process, we identified 6 critical qualities that Americans were looking for, but didn't always associate with women. And so we've been studying it for some time and really trying to understand how women can signal those qualities, how Americans perceive that someone is electable, and what to do about it. And as it's pulled up here, these are what we call the critical 6. And there's a lot of different ways to play with them. But the first big quality is being strong, stable, and visible. And these were the qualities, by the way, that we were looking for during the debate, because as much as policy matters, and it does matter, signaling that you're the right kind of leader and that you are basically fulfilling this invisible checklist for Americans is something where a debate is a great opportunity to showcase. So strong, stable, and visible. It's all about being physically and mentally strong. Now, there is no expectation right here that, Kamala has a wrestling match with Donald Trump and wins. But we found in our research that not being physically strong, falling over, being outside the norm physically in some way or another is a disqualifying agent. So just making sure you check the boxes is really important. Same thing with visible strength. Mental strength, excuse me. Mental strength is all about being able to stand toe to toe with an opponent, with Putin, right? Being able to hold your own on behalf of the United States. And certainly we saw Kamala Harris do that in spades as well, really showing up and being strong. At the same time, redefining strength, not just as sort of a crushing thing, but as a chance to lift people up and in a way feminizing strength in a way that's really special and cool. Yeah. Stability is also really important. Americans right now, when they ask if the world is stable, they'll say 87% of them say that the world is unstable. 70% say America is unstable. Sarah Longwell has talked about this as well, and we've seen it in our data. Americans are really shifting into a posture where they're looking for calm, structure, order. There's a perception that there's a lot of instability out there. There's been an undernarration of a lot of things that are happening in the world, and people are feeling the effects of polarization and concerns about chaos. And so they're looking for stable, someone who can balance, being tough on the bad guy, but also being soft and kind to the good guy. They're looking for that as well. Same with visibility. Visibility is a critical 6 variable. Visibility is all about being congruent, being transparent, being forthright. A lot of politicians are associated with corruption in all of our research, right? Corruption is a #1 irritant. And so visibility is the antidote to that. Showing up, being there, and saying, I'm here. The challenger quality is also really important. What you see is Kamala Harris and Tim Walz show up as manifestations of the challenger quality. It's about breaking or bending rules. It's about being the coach. In fact, that's something we discovered in our research a couple of years ago. Americans were looking for a coach to lead. right? They're looking for someone who can challenge people to come together, and at the same time challenge things that are unjust, which is why Kamala Harris as a prosecutor is such a powerful story and something that Americans are truly looking for. Okay, meet the moment. Meet the moment is a quality that has traditionally been weaponized against women. It's this idea of not being an ambitious leader, being a reluctant leader, rather. You can see historically women, when they run for office, it's been weaponized against them, and they say, oh, you're just ambitious, you're climbing the ladder by doing this or that, right? Meet the moment is the story where you did not seek out power, but you rose to the occasion when you saw some pain and you brought people together. And Kamala Harris has been doing that beautifully in what I like to call the switcheroo. Kamala Harris really did not signal that she was being anointed, right? She said, I'm going to work for it. And that really mattered to a lot of movable voters who really responded to the effort that was put forth and the sense of momentum that came along with her move to the presidential ticket or the presidential spot. Fundamentally American is a key quality that we can't underline enough. This is in the top 5 most important qualities Americans are looking for in their president. It is about being earnest. It is about being perceived as decent, working hard, being nice, looking out for the little guy, being associated with patriotism, respect, optimism, being the American dream. One thing that we have learned in our research is that women are associated with this quality only 7% of the time. This is why it is so wonderful and so smart of Kamala Harris and her team to lean in as hard as they have to the USA that you heard in the convention, to talk about the American dream, to talk about America. This is critical, and she's been doing this beautifully, and I couldn't be happier. Nurture equality. Nurture equality is all about saying, you matter to me. In our research, 65% of Americans say they don't feel like they matter in America. We've tested this multiple times, and the number is usually about the same. Nurture is the antidote to that, right? It's saying, I see you, you matter. This is why when we interview voters who have a politician who doesn't align with them from a values perspective or even their views, you have a Democrat who has a Republican representative or vice versa, they'll say, I don't care. They showed up to the Boy Scout meeting in my community. They called me on my birthday. They indicated that I matter to them. This is a very important quality for Americans. And it's why candidates who signal, I see you, this is about you, you as the hero of the story, you Americans are the center of this campaign. That's why that really resonates. And then finally, the innovator quality. The innovator quality is something that we're so pleased to have seen Kamala Harris lay out so beautifully. 2 areas, we've been studying her for some time. She wasn't as strongly associated with it, probably because she's been VP, and it's kind of hard to show it as a VP. But it's about having a vision for the country, and it's about innovating solutions, innovating things, and it's about getting things done. Those are 2 things that she's been talking about, both in her debate and throughout her campaign, while laying out a really exciting vision for the country. And we've seen a lot of progress there. Now, if we go to the next slide, when you look at Republicans and Democrats and independents, you can see that each of these qualities broken down matters to varying degree, right? You can see, for example, on the blue side, that's sort of the Democrats, right? That on the bottom right, you can see that nice matters quite a bunch to Democrats. You'll notice that it's on the right, on the blue side. It is not on the red side. They don't care about nice. They care about someone who gets things done at any cost more, or someone who is a rule breaker who will stand up to power. One of the things that we have seen, one of the opportunity spaces for this election is saying, right, Kamala Harris is associated with a number of these qualities. Which ones is she close to that she can claim and steal some Republican votes and steal some movable voter votes? And the qualities that we've been looking for her to claim that she's done so beautifully in the debate and will continue to do, making tough decisions, working hard, being a fearless, clear communicator, being mentally and physically strong, all of which she did in spades. Now, if we go to the next slide, what we'll see, though, is that she has shored up the base. This is done after the debate. She shored up the base, but you see them neck and neck, Trump and Harris in the swing states. Where we need to make movement is with movable voters who haven't made up their mind yet. And those qualities that I mentioned earlier, the ability to make tough decisions, being a fearless, clear communicator, doing it on a global stage, those are the ones that matter most. So moving forward, we hope to see Kamala Harris continue to tell the story that she's told while leaning into those qualities. And doing so, next slide, in a very personal way. A lot has been made of her showing up in the debate so beautifully, showing up the campaign so beautifully, but not necessarily having those one-on-one interviews with journalists. Personally, this is just as Gretchen, I don't mind that she hasn't been talking to journalists, but there is an opportunity space for her to take forward the message she's been putting forth in the debate, right? Bringing it into the living room. And she did that so beautifully with Oprah just the other day, but having more one-on-one interactions with Kamala Harris and the American voters, specifically men, many of which make up movable voters, I think is going to make a huge difference for her. She is such a caring leader. She's strong, she's kind, she listens well, and I think it can only do great things for her moving forward. So that's my take.
Thanks, Gretchen. These are always fascinating because it's so difficult to try to strike the right balance in all of these areas, right? Being a reluctant leader and yet already having a clear vision for the country, and being a nurturer but incredibly strong. You gave some recommendations about, tactics where you want to see her more, but I would love to ask kind of which area of leadership do you think, she has the most room to grow in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I have a little bit of a spoiler. We just got in some new data that showed how she moved on these key qualities. And the good news is she moved in the right direction on every single one. She moved up on strength. She moved up on worthy of respect. She moved up on being a fearless, clear communicator, a hard worker, and ability to unite people. And Trump moved way down, which is wonderful for the election. It's subtle, but it's important. Where there's room to grow is this story about making tough decisions. Kamala Harris obviously has made tons of tough decisions in her role and in her career, from working on immigration to supporting the Afghanistan withdrawal, refusing to defend Prop 8. She's done so much of that. Right now, she and Donald Trump are tied neck and neck in that quality, and that's something that's really important to movable voters and something that they need to hear stories about.
Was there anything surprising to you? And I'm probably eventually going to come back and also want to ask the same question to Ben and Paige and to everyone. But for now, was there anything surprising to you in kind of how, first of all, in what these qualities are, but in second of all, how people perceive them?
Well, certainly the fundamentally American qualities surprised me big time. Seeing that women are so rarely associated with this quality, it bummed me out. But also as a researcher, I was like, wait a second, what? But that just goes to show that bias is really strong. I think also the innovator story, that the need for women to be perceived as innovators, as visionaries for the future. And, I've been surrounded by powerful, amazing women. There's two other women on this call who are amazing innovators here and leaning into innovation, which is so important. Not being associated with that quality and having to lean into that kind of surprised me that women have to do that, knowing what women are capable of. But it definitely provided like a great opportunity space of as a culture, we need to tell these stories and lift up innovation. I think it's really, really important.
Thanks, Gretchen. And I love that you ended there kind of talking about that was one of the pieces that surprised you the most, was kind of identifying that gender dynamic, right? And because we know, right, in a diverse electorate, and in particular with a candidate that identifies as a Black woman, there are going to be dynamics at play, as there always are. And so it's really important not just to understand what those dynamics are, but also, again, when we're thinking about who the electorate is, who voters are, that we deeply understand all of the demographics, that we deeply understand, in particular, voters of color. And so I'm going to toss over to Henry to talk a little bit about his research, and then I know I'm going to have some questions for him. So go for it, Henry.
Sure. So actually, I just want to probably just start by responding to Ben and Gretchen and how they're using research so differently than we often think about research in this space, right? So obviously we all kind of froze because of the New York Times polling today in some Sunbelt states. We're really happy with polling, large public polling. As recently as 2 days ago, and what's interesting in the research that you all are doing is not just that you're getting kind of below that, but you're also kind of just going at it from a completely different direction. And I think this is important because as pollsters, we are really kind of struggling, candidly, as an industry. We don't really say this out there because we had a model. It worked really, really well for decades that relied very heavily on randomization. I can get into that in all sorts of details, Ben could. And we really can't use randomization in the same way. That kind of everybody, you all have heard this, everybody had a landline, and so you could just call 100,000 people, expect about 18% of them to answer the phone, and slightly fewer than that to actually spend 15 minutes on the phone with you answering questions. And that initial randomization was important throughout the survey research. And now we do all sorts of things at the beginning. We create quotas. We weight everyone in the survey, not just our firm, but every firm does this now to some extent, depending on how much money they have to spend. And then there are firms like ours where, because we're so interested in people of color, we oversample African Americans. We poll more Native Americans than any other firm in the country. We do lots of polling. We're doing polling now in multiple states around substance use disorders, around health care. And so there are lots of ways where polling and the ability to, in modern polling, to do some things outside of randomization actually make polling more effective to do some things beyond elections. But for elections, which is where we are right now, we all don't really know if we can trust the polls. The research that you all are doing is opening doors for things we can trust, right? And starting to kind of break down some of those walls between researchers and the actual fights that we need to have. That we need to change minds, not just tell you where people are right now. And so both of these were, I think, excellent examples of where research is and where it needs to go. Paige and I have talked about and she said, would you join this? And I was like, well, I don't have any research right now that's right on this topic. She said, yeah, but you like to talk about these things, so please join us and talk about it. And so one thing I've been really interested in is in that new model of polling that we do, we make corrections after almost every election based on the fact that we didn't get it exactly right. Sometimes we were way off, sometimes we were a little off. And so many firms over the last 6 years, for instance, or 8 years, we've started to really make sure that we have the right makeup both at the front end and at the back end on weighting with regard to education level, right? Obviously, we've historically always looked at race and trying to make sure that we have enough people of color and that we're weighting them appropriately. And there's firms that are better at this and not as good at this. But I'm going to, I guess, argue here, right, that these are really proxies for things we don't understand, right? And by that I mean, let's take a group that we think of as being particularly valuable to Republican candidates and to Trump, white working class voters. If there was not a very substantial number of white working class voters voting for the Democratic Party would be dead. And so being white and working class clearly is not what's determining whether or not these folks vote for one party or the other. But we try to get the right numbers and percentages of white working class voters with a certain education level because we can actually figure those things out. But they may be proxies for other things that are much harder to figure out. So for instance, they may be a proxy for or they may be less effective, let's say, than other things that aren't proxies. Let's go at it from that direction. So for instance, does whether you went to an integrated high school matter to how you perceive race and political candidates? Does your own personal experience with things like receiving welfare benefits, does this affect how you vote? Your own experience with the healthcare system, is this more important for how you perceive the policies of different candidates? And what we're looking at now is maybe the biggest example of this, which is abortion rights. And so people's own experiences with abortion are flipping on its head many of the people, let's be very specific, white women, who have been an important base for the Republican Party. Now we're seeing not just unmarried white women, a group that Paige really led, saying like, we've got to look not just at gender and age, but also marital status. Was some of the earliest versions of this kind of way of thinking about things. We have to think about abortion as, how does it impact men, right? And we've done some work with Planned Parenthood around the impact on men. And how do we talk to different kinds of men? We found that in particular, messaging about supporting the women that you love is really important. And so just going through that, both of your bodies of research come at things differently and are not just about who wins, but how do we move a country into a more just moment. Hopefully that's something you were looking for, Paige.
Amen.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Henry. What's really interesting is you're talking about the limitations, but also the possibilities for advancement and development and polling. And, you know, we have a lot of folks on the call. One of the questions that came in is from someone who identifies as an activist, right? We have a lot of folks on the call who are quote unquote on the ground, right? Doing the door knocking and the calling and the true organizing, which is actually having conversations with people. And that's where some of those nuances that you're talking about actually most often surface when you're hearing people's stories and who they are and what their background is. So a question that came in is, you know, what does all this mean for those folks, for people who are on the ground, who are engaging and trying to persuade folks? What are some lessons that can be taken from all of your research and from everything that you all have shared today? And I'll start with Henry, just because I didn't get to ask you a question specifically. Sure. So we'll start with you, but then anyone else, please jump in.
Well, I think both of my colleagues here did a good job of saying, like, here's where I would lead. I do think, though, that the fundamental idea is about the conversation, right? And so even in the question, I think, is baked in this idea that we need to be having more conversations. We know that all of the ways that Gretchen talked about communicating to the benefit of women and women of color candidates is essential, but those are actually messages that also work quite well more broadly for progressive candidates. And so I think it's making sure that we're having those conversations, that we're not just having them at election time, and that we're understanding that even if we are slightly wrong at the door, if we're at the door, and I think this gets to some of what Gretchen said, if we're showing up, that we're winning, right? And where we have lost, in my work, I've been a campaign manager, at multiple levels. In my work around the country, and now as a researcher, what I see is that particularly the Republican Party in certain areas has done deep work over decades to recover from their problem. And their problem was they were not going door to door. They were not building nonprofit organizations in local communities. And they've done this particularly, I think they really kind of started it in many ways, targeting the Latino community. And they've seen benefit, not as much as some polls indicate, but still significant enough to make Republican candidates competitive in swing districts where there are sizable and growing Latino populations. I'd pause there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Henry laid out really resonates with me, which is I think, like, as we think about the striations in the electorate, like one of the ones you didn't mention that I think is the most profoundly important to why polling is like a little bit broken as it relates to the straight up measurement of who's going to win, who's going to lose, which we can get into a long debate about whether there's any real value in that. I mean, I kind of subscribe to, you know, the Mike Podhorzer like mad poll disease, that this is about margin of effort, it's not about margin of error, right? And like the media polls are kind of BS, and the media is trying to get clicks and engagement, and that's why they do those polls, and they're not really of a net benefit to our community and quite frankly democracy, but that's neither here nor there. But I mean, I think the major striation that I see is like there's a group of voters who are engaged and there are a group of voters who aren't engaged.
Right.
And the folks who aren't engaged are really hard to survey. They don't want to, they're not necessarily interested in replying to a text to web solicit on their mobile device or answering their phone. They're busy. They don't necessarily care about politics. They don't connect politics to their everyday. And so I think if you have a captive audience at the door and it's one of those people, that's such a magical moment, right? But it's not just at the door, it's in your social media feed, it's in your TikTok, it's in your WhatsApp group, it's all of the places, it's in the podcasts that you listen to. We're in such a diffuse media environment. People are getting signals from all of these different places. They're busy, the signals are at cross odds with each other. So if ever you have that captive moment, are you delivering a singular fact about Kamala Harris and her plan to make childcare more affordable? Right. Are you delivering a singular fact about her plan to build more homes in America, to make housing more affordable? Are you delivering the fact that Donald Trump ended a woman's right to choose in this country and Kamala Harris is going to restore a woman's right to choose in this country? The simple facts about what she intends to do and what her presidency will look like. You know, one of the things that Gretchen flagged that I think is so salient here is like, just filling people in on the details, right? And providing that little bit of information credentials her so well. And we saw that in the debate that like the numbers just snapped on the economy from the very simple plans that she put forth. And so I think if you have that moment at the door, if you have that moment in your feed, if you have that moment at the barbershop, deliver that simple fact. What's she gonna do for you? And Gretchen, your slide that circled, we got to do way better on this. I mean, that resonates with me so much, right? There's that 1/3 of the movable voters who aren't convinced yet that what she's going to do is going to help them. So we have to make that point to them.
Can I just follow up on something Ben said, because I don't want to lose it. So we did a survey for Voter Participation Center, which you know well, this cycle, large number of unregistered African Americans, and it was a hard group to find, right? But we did, and by doing that, getting to what Ben was saying, we identified that homelessness was their number one issue, something that simply is not in play, right? And then what we do see all over the country, and we have been seeing for years, several years now, is the cost of housing. But this was even beyond the cost of housing to concerns about homelessness. And a part of that was that this was a population that had much higher housing instability than other groups. So it was both, they were concerned about people on the street, but their own personal experiences with housing instability. And if we don't find ways to talk to those people that Ben pointed to, we are not going to even be talking about the issues that motivate them.
That is such an important insight. Go ahead, Paige, and then I'll toss to Gretchen.
I want to connect a couple of dots here. I think the conversations are critical, and I think the way Vice President Harris has conversations are important. Going to what Gretchen said, I do think she needs to have more intimate one-to-one conversations with voters to show that she understands and responds to their lived experiences. Right now, the conversation is one way, from a podium to a rally. Very exciting. 100 million people in a studio, in a stadium, that's all great. But this now needs to be a two-way conversation. And she needs to communicate to the voters that they are the deciders. They are the one with power. And she needs them to make sure that what she envisions for the country comes true.
Hater or lover, I'm in the love camp for Oprah, and I will say that was the best that I've seen Vice President Harris have that kind of intimate, I think, Gretchen, you called it like the living room conversation, which is still different from one-on-one, but I felt like a step in the right direction. Gretchen, please.
And also to
Absolutely.
follow up, I think she should be having these conversations a lot with, clearly all the voters, but really focus sometimes on men.
I think that's exactly right. And I loved what my esteemed colleague said. Showing up, if you're showing up, you're winning, as well as, the need to have those two-way conversations and kind of talking about how policy actually, like how that actually shows up in people's lives. One of the things that we're seeing is, and this is a very exciting election. It's an accelerated timeline for conveying a lot of messages that usually you'd have a lot more time to do. So it's like, just do everything faster. I can't imagine how much coffee Kamala Harris is drinking these days. Bless her. But as surrogates for her, right, as individual voters and as people knocking on doors, being able to translate, this is what she means when it is an opportunity economy. This is what that looks like. And this is how it shows up in your life. I'm very excited by what she's pushed forward with the housing policy. That's huge for young voters. We've heard it again and again, that their biggest American dream is to be able to even imagine having a house. It's such a huge deal. Of course, healthcare matters, Social Security matters, reproductive rights matter. Basically, money and freedom and everything associated with those two things are huge. So translating that, I think, is really big. If I can give a slight twist on the answer, because I'm a little bit of a secret introvert, I'm imagining not knocking down doors for a second. There is a little bit of a digital battleground as well here, where movable voters are living. And I want to offer up that Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram are where the largest majority of movable voters are living. So lifting up and operating those spaces, I like Twitter a lot. I mean, I hate it. But going into those spaces, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, lifting up stories, engaging with people there, that's a really great way to engage with the voters that Kamala Harris needs most, and telling those stories that we talked about.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, for bringing that into the conversation, because I think sometimes people tend to perceive the digital battleground as just about young people, and I'm using that phrase really broadly, but just it's really important to know how many important audiences are there in those spaces. So thank you for that. We only have a few more minutes. I know you all could probably talk all day and I could ask you so many questions, but I just want to say thank you so much for this interesting data, this research, but also for connecting that and making it so practical to not just what VP Harris can do moving forward, and the campaign can learn from this, but also, again, many people on this call find themselves in different positions, but all working towards that same goal. And so figuring out how to best extrapolate information and insights from your research to impact what they're doing between now and November. And as we said at the top, this is about innovating for the public good over the long haul as well. And so I think there were some really interesting insights that were surfaced here about the electorate, about the innovations that are needed in polling, but also always coming back to conversation, direct interaction, whether online or off, with the voters, and that's where the power really lies. So thank you all so much. For our remaining few minutes, I'm going to actually toss back to Paige to close us out.
Thank you, and thank everybody for joining and giving this fabulous conversation. I do want to emphasize the point that you made. We have to start thinking differently about how to understand the American voter. We need to understand their lived experiences. We need to understand how those impact their policy and political views. And the other thing we need to understand is when a candidate talks about issue A, we want to understand what emotions that issue evokes in various populations, because people decide whether they're going to trust a candidate to represent them in office based on their emotions. So the debate was wonderful. I think it really, really helped her. I think it shrunk Donald Trump because he was just scowling and crouched over the whole time. But it's really about how do we get inside the emotional decision-making that voters make. So with that, thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Paige.
Thank you, Paige. Money and
Thank
freedom.
you, Paige.
I love that one.